Okay, well, now it's going to be time for our Tech Corner, our last little segment of the show here. This is a good one Dirk has for you. Periodically, we take a closer look at new measurement equipment that, of course, makes your job easier, or faster, more accurate, whatever it may be. This week, we're going to look at a gap, flush, and radius measurement system from NEXTSENSE, an Austrian company. It's called the CALIPRI, I think that's what it is, and Dirk is going to show that to us right now. So, Dirk, take her away.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, as Mike said, this is the CALIPRI from NEXTSENSE, and it's for gap and flush and radius measurement, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. Typically, let's talk a little bit about how radius measurements or gap measurements are typically done, and then we'll get into the CALIPRI because I'm going to touch on this a little bit. Typically, when you do a gap and flush measurement, almost all of them out there today are laser line scanners, as is the CALIPRI, by the way. They're laser line scanners, and typically what you do is you put your sensor up to, this is my fake gap, you put your sensor up to your gap, and you press a button, you take your measurement, and you get your gap and your flush measurement. And these work very well. I mean, they've been around for a while. They do give relatively accurate readings, but many of them suffer from a couple problems. One is a repeatability between operator. If all the operators aren't trained on the equipment properly, you can have some inter-operator error or variation between operators on the measurements. Now, obviously this can be addressed with training, and anybody running precision equipment should be trained properly, but it is an issue that's out there. The other one is simply that they measure gap and flush, and that's it. But there is a lot of information in the profile of this gap that isn't being collected, which is really valuable, and that can tell you a lot about your manufacturing process. So that's where the CALIPRI comes in. The CALIPRI consists of two pieces. There's the sensor, the business end, which I'm holding here in my hand, and it's tethered to a ruggedized touchpad. And by the way, it's tethered right now. They are working on a wireless version of this as well to get rid of the tether. Now the CALIPRI works a little bit different. It's a 3-laser system, and the way it works is you hold it up to your gap and you rotate it about the gap, and that allows it to take measurements from all angles of that gap and create a profile which allows you to do not only gap and flush, but also the angle between the surfaces, and more important, I think, is the radius, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So let's show you how this system works. We're going to go to our screen grab here, and I'm going to load a test plan. And the test plan is simply the instructions for the operator on how they're going to measure, let's say we're going to measure a vehicle here. And I'm going to bring up my Passat. And so we're going to get a picture of my Passat here. And there's the left-hand side of my Passat, the driver's side. And I can flip it around. We can look at the right-hand side there. Now, I'm going to zoom into this a little bit so you can see a couple things. Yeah, we'll zoom in. Okay, so you'll notice the arrow right here. The arrow tells the operator what direction or what orientation to hold the sensor. The red tells the operator about where they're going to measure on the vehicle. And the measurement box up here actually has a couple functions. One is when you select it, that tells the software this is the point you're going to measure. And also once the measurement is done, this is where your measurement data is displayed, or part of how it's displayed. We'll get to that in a little bit. So I'm going to actually move down here, and I'm going to do a couple measurements, and we're going to do one on the bench, and then I'll run a little video for you as well. But let's go to our gauge cam first, and I'll show you kind of what this looks like in action. All right, so we've got, let me get this oriented so you can see it properly. There we go. So you notice I got my little gap right here that I've created, and I'm going to press the start button on the CALIPRI. It goes into measurement mode. I rotate it one way, I rotate it the other way. As soon as it's done collecting all the data, it just stops taking data. It finishes, and it comes up, and it shows me my results. Now, let's go back to the screenshot here for a little bit. And we'll notice that it tells me, once that data is done, that 3 of the data points, or 3 of the pieces of data I collected were good. Those are in green. I'm sorry, 2 of them were good, and 3 of the pieces of data I collected were bad. So there's a visual indication for the operator. And if we look at the profile, we'll see the blue is the actual profile of the gap that I shot, and these values in red are the data that we collected. We'll come back to that in just a little bit. Let me show you what this looks like on a real vehicle. I'll get a little piece of video we'll run, if we can run that. Okay, so I'm going to be measuring, this is a picture of me, me measuring my Passat. I'm measuring the front end of the door right now. So you can see I rock the sensor to the right, and then I bring it back around to the left, so it's collecting all the data related to that profile. And here's a close-up view of the same thing. By the way, you don't have to go from the right to the left. You can go from left to the right. Basically, you're just working your way all the way around that seam. Now, I select the next point by using the touchpad, telling it where I'm going to measure next, and we go over and we measure this gap right here. So again, I move it to the right, and then I move it back around to the left. So again, I've captured that entire profile. And this is what it looks like on the screen as I'm capturing that data. There's a little visual guide that's showing the operator. So you see I've moved it to the right, it's collected the data in the center, and now it collects the data to the left, and then it displays the results, and there we go. So let's take a look at what kind of data we're going to get here. Now, what I did is once I was finished with that, I stored this data, the data measurement that I collected, I stored it onto the software so that I can come back and retrieve it later. So obviously you can do that. You can store all the data that you've collected and then retrieve it later, analyze it later. So we're going to do that. If we go to our screen capture here again, I'm going to upload my measurement data. And that's the measurement data for my Passat. There we go. And let's look at this. I can look at this in a split screen. So notice on the split screen, I can click on each of these points. And on the right-hand side, you'll see it's showing me the data for those points. Now let's just look just at the measurement profile by itself. And let's zoom in on this a little bit. Okay, so the data here at the bottom, that is the gap measurement. The flush is right here. This is showing me a flush of about 0.9 millimeters, and that is the difference between the height of this plane and the height of this plane. There's also the angle between these two planes, and more importantly, is it showing me these two radiuses. This radius on this fold, on this curve, is 2.82 millimeters, and the radius on the left-hand curve is 1.23 millimeters. Now, you might ask, why do we care about radius? Well, let me tell you. Here's an example. So suppose you're looking at gap, and the gap is off. Gap can be off for a couple reasons. It could be that the door, let's say, has been manufactured perfectly, but it simply hasn't been aligned in the frame properly. And so you could have a gap issue from there. And then that's simply an alignment issue. The other reason you could have a gap problem is because the door has not been manufactured properly. And if you were able to look at the radius, you might see that that radius is too big or the radius is too small. Over several measurements, you might find that the radius varies from door to door, that you have a lot of variation in the radius. You might see the radius trending in a particular direction. Maybe the radius getting larger, maybe pointing to tool issues. So rather than an alignment issue, you've actually got a manufacturing process issue, and you don't necessarily pick that up from just looking at gap and flush. So being able to collect the entire profile gives the operator and engineers a little bit more information that they can use in order to understand their manufacturing process and if there is an issue going on with that. Okay, accuracy of the system. Basically 80 microns. It depends on the type, according to the manufacturer, according to NEXTSENSE, depends on the type of measurement you're taking. It can be better than 80, but their spec says about 80 microns. Repeatability is 35 microns. Calibration, this is always important. There is a calibration jig that comes with this. You mount this in the calibration jig, and it does an automatic calibration for you. The jig itself can be sent back to NEXTSENSE and recalibrated and then sent back to you. So periodically, obviously, the jig is like your master. And so you can send your master or your calibration jig back and have that calibrated periodically. Finally, obviously, export Everybody wants to get their data out and do something with it. You can export your data in a variety of different exportable database formats. You can export by individual part. You can export by operator. You can export by shift. However you want to do it, you select your fields, you export it. That data can be sent out, obviously, over the network, or it can be put on a USB stick and transported. This is just a simple touchpad, so it's a Windows, I believe this is Windows 8 on here. And that's basically it. I mean, so you have all that data at your fingertips that you can use. So once again, that is the CALIPRI gap, flush, and radius, or fold measurement, as they call it, radius or fold, from NEXTSENSE. If you want more information on it, you can go out to our player page. Right underneath, there is a link out to NEXTSENSE, to the CALIPRI page, and you can read more about it. Once again, thanks to the folks at NEXTSENSE for sending us the CALIPRI. And Mike, back to you.